Ghost of Tsushima. Where do I even begin? May come as a surprise to some of you, but I do play games other than the DMC franchise, with this one being the game I've been playing as of late. I recently finished it, I'm on my way to platinuming it. I've been mulling it over in my mind for a couple of days now and decided I want to make this video to get my thoughts out there. Not necessarily going to be a review, not going to follow a standard review structure, not going to be giving a final score at the end of the video, but I will be talking about things I thought worked well, things I thought didn't work well. Obviously there will be a spoiler warning here. I will be talking about the game in its entirety as well as the ending and such, so you have been warned, and apologies if you can hear any fans in the background. It is absolutely boiling in the UK here, and yeah, fans are a necessity if I don't want to pass out on my desk. So the general gist of Ghost of Tsushima, for those of you who don't know, is the Mongol invasion of the island of Tsushima, Japan, in 1274. The game puts you in the shoes of Jin Sakai, a lone samurai, tasked with essentially saving his island from the Mongol invaders, and essentially stopping them from reaching mainland Japan. It's a very tropey sort of story, you know, the whole one-man army having to do everything he can to save his country, his kingdom, the world, whatever you want to put there. And I guess that's what it seems like on the surface level. I didn't necessarily follow all too much pre-release stuff for this game. I watched a few of the gameplay reveals or the gameplay videos simply because I was intrigued, but other than that I didn't follow all too much, so I was pleasantly surprised when I got fully stuck into this game. Now the first thing I want to talk about, simply to get it out of the way, is the graphical fidelity of this game. I'm not much of a graphics snob, I'm not much of a person who focuses on graphics all that much when I play video games, but this game, played on a 4K TV, you know, HDR enabled, looked absolutely stunning, specifically because it is an open world game, fully seamless, no loading screens. Crazy. I don't know what they've done or how they've done it. Probably should watch a Digital Foundry video on it, but there are times where this game literally looks like a painting. I think they've used the color palette and the contrast and all that to an amazing degree, and it really does look amazing. And if you've seen any of the photo mode stuff, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. On that front, Sucker Punch absolutely nailed it. Along with the cinematography of things like cutscenes and such, I think they absolutely nailed that as well, in terms of like the samurai cinema, you know, like Kurosawa films like Seven Samurai and such. I think they did an absolutely fantastic job, and I think thematically what they've done fits very well with the game. And yeah, the island of Tsushima is absolutely amazing, as you guys are seeing in the background here. So with the graphical talk out of the way, let's dive into the story. Now of course, I knew going in that the main conflict, or the main overarching conflict for this game would be the Mongol invasion, having to face the Khan, you know, stop the Mongol invasion. I'd imagine the last boss would have been the, was it Khotan Khan, the leader of the Mongol invasion, I guess, so to speak. But I was thoroughly surprised when it wasn't. Yes, of course, the Mongols play a large part of it, but there are multiple layers of conflict in this game that seek to, or serve to, drive the story forward. One of which is the internal conflict of Jin Sakai, which is shown not just in the story, but in his gameplay as well. Jin is a samurai. Obviously, those of you who know about samurai or know about the legend of the 47 Ronin, you know that honor, duty, code plays a massive part of being a samurai, so to speak, even if it is the most ass-backwards thing at times. And this is exactly how the Mongols succeed in invading the island of Tsushima in the first place. They spent years studying the samurai. They knew how they fight, they knew how they live their life, they know their language and such. There's a whole monologue by the villain at one point, but they know everything about the samurai, and so they begin to pick them apart. They find all these vulnerabilities, and just like that, with the snap of their fingers, in a few days they've conquered essentially almost the entire island. And so for Jin to take back his homeland, he'll have to fight fire with fire and use any means necessary to fight against these invaders and win the war. Which, you know, necessarily makes sense, you know, using any means necessary to win the war. But as a samurai, none of that makes sense. So Jin has to go against everything he's taught, everything he knows as a samurai, everything he knows about his way of life. He has to throw all of that out the window and basically be as dishonorable as possible, use as many underhanded tactics to gain whatever advantages possible, considering that he is one man against an entire army. But of course, Jin is a samurai, so there is the start of the internal conflict. Is what he is doing right? Is it wrong? You know, as a samurai, they would rather fight honorably and lose than use whatever means possible and win. See what I mean about being ass backwards? Yeah. And this transition into the Ghost of Tsushima, which I'm going to get more into the title in a second, is reflected very well in the gameplay. You unlock more and more ghost techniques or ghost apparatus, things like poison, throwing daggers, smoke bombs, all the crazy ninja stuff that you'd expect. The more you play and the more you essentially liberate the island of Tsushima. And this of course grows the legend of the ghost, of this vengeful spirit that stalks around in the dead of night, slaughtering Mongols, leaving nothing but a trail of blood and guts everywhere he goes. Jin isn't necessarily happy about it, but he does what he must. However, this does not bode well with the rest of the samurai, which brings me to the first act of this game, or the first third of this game, and that is rescuing Jin's uncle Shimura, who is the head samurai of the island, so to speak, to put it in layman's terms. He was captured during the initial invasion of the island, and the first third of the game is spent on finding a way to rescue your uncle. Uncle Shimura is essentially Jin's father figure. He is the person that raised Jin after his parents died. He is the person Jin looks up to. He taught him everything he knew about being a samurai, about being a warrior. And of course Jin goes to rescue him not just because he is family, but because he believes he has the means to help save and liberate the island. And so despite the fact that Jin is single-handedly turning the tide against the Mongols to win this war for the people of Tsushima, Shimura and the rest of the samurai look down on Jin, and Jin is essentially, or eventually, branded as a traitor to the samurai, and eventually he is to be executed. He is stripped of his estate, his home, of all his possessions. The clan Sakai is disbanded, and Jin is essentially set to never be remembered. He truly is a ghost in the sense that, despite the fact that he pretty much single-handedly saved the island, nobody will remember it because the shogun and the rest of the samurai will scrub his name from the annals of history. And all of this is brought to a screaming crescendo not when you fight the Khan, but when you fight Shimura as the final boss. The father and son clash, representing two opposing ideologies. Jin having no honor whatsoever, and Shimura being a slave to it. In fact, Shimura is tasked by the shogun to take Jin's head as punishment for letting this ghost run amok his island. Shimura does everything and anything he can to take Jin away from this path, with Jin essentially being his only family, his son, the person who he'd set up all his life to take over his legacy, seeing as he'd had no family ever in the span of raising Jin. And yeah, that all comes to a screaming halt as they are forced to fight each other. And of course, in typical Sucker Punch fashion, you are given a choice at the end of this duel. I think both of them are bittersweet in their own way. One of them is more tragic than the other, despite being thematically the one that I think makes most sense. I think that's the one that hits the hardest. In the true ending, or the one that I think people seem to deem as good, is the one where Jin spares Shimura and decides to walk away, with Shimura telling him that the ghost will essentially be hunted for the rest of his days and there's nothing that Shimura can do. And the other ending essentially being Jin having to ritualistically kill Shimura to restore Shimura's honor, giving him a warrior's death, so to speak, which again is the one I think that thematically fits the most. Jin spends the entire game essentially disobeying whatever Shimura says, and him finally giving in to his uncle's last request of killing him, from what I saw, left a lot of people in tears, and rightly so. But whatever way you look at it, the story served its purpose of drawing you in. I think the characters of Jin, Shimura, and all the other supporting characters I didn't actually mention, I think they're all developed exceptionally well, especially if you follow through with a lot of the side quests, which span all the way from the first act all the way to the final act, so the characters develop along with you. Everyone's all on the same pace, so to speak. Nobody ends up being stuck in one mentality for the entire game, if that makes sense, but I guess in some ways they do, considering some of the characters can be pretty stubborn, but I digress. The story did its job of sucking me in, so to speak, and getting me to care for these characters, which I haven't played an open world game in a while which has done that. In fact, I haven't played an open world game in a long time regardless. I think the last one I played was The Witcher 3. And even then, considering I didn't play the rest of the Witcher games or anything else, I didn't care all too much for the characters, if that makes sense. But that brings us to another large part of the Ghost of Tsushima, and that is the gameplay. As I said, you are thrown into somewhat of an open world. Some areas are gated off due to progression, but by the end of it, by the third act, you are granted full access to the entire island, fully seamless, a wide variety of locales, of vistas to see, of things to do. There's plenty of side quests. Some of them can be a little bit repetitive, but there are others out there, mainly the main sort of side character attached side quests, which have an overarching long story. I think they handle those all pretty well. There's plenty of things to find. I think the whole idea of a minimalistic HUD or heads-up display being fantastic, and it fits very well with the game. You can find points of interest not by looking at the map, but by looking for smokestacks on the horizon. Of course, everybody knows about the guiding wind. There are no waypoints, no numbers, no numerical markers, no compasses. You are literally guided by the wind. If you follow the wind, it will take you to where you want to go. Absolutely amazing way to have the game naturally guide the player without feeling too intrusive. I think the way they handle the location of the points of interest is rather organic as well. You weren't overwhelmed with a bunch of things to do. Sometimes on your way to a destination you'd find or come across something, and you could choose to go off to it and maybe or come back to it later. So I think the way they handled that was great. The gameplay, I have a few reservations about, shall I say. Obviously it's not going to have the most amazing or deepest combat, but for what it is, I think they did a really good job. You've obviously got 4 different stances for your katana, which essentially act as 4 different styles for enemies. There are specifically 4 different types of enemies, with each of them being vulnerable to a style, and when I say vulnerable, I mean it will build their stagger meter faster. Of course, all 4 styles do damage, but if you want to build a stagger and break an enemy's guard, you'd have to be in the right style. Of course, you don't have to fight head on. If you want, you can shoot people down from afar with a bow, or if you want to take the sneaky route, you can go around, stab people in the back, use throwing weapons, things like that. So there's a variety of ways to tackle enemy encounters. If you want to dive more into the samurai side of things, you can have a standoff with every enemy you essentially come across, and you can go charging head on. Or if you want to be sneaky, you do have the option to do that as well. I myself found a middle ground between the two. Being sneaky sometimes was a little time consuming, so sometimes I went in guns blazing. At the same time, sometimes I went in sneaky, ended up getting caught, and then all hell broke loose, and I had to rely on the trusty katana to make things work. There are also a few different upgrade trees, so as you play, Jin does get stronger and stronger, which again feeds more into the legend of this ghost. The longer you play, the better you get, and the more you genuinely are an absolute menace to these Mongols as you obliterate through them in the matter of minutes. One of the highlights I do want to mention are the mythic quests, which are special quests, one of a kind or one-offs that you can do. They've got their own backstory, kind of interesting. They kind of have you travel across the entire island to get access to things like special mythical equipment, mythical armor, or mythical fighting techniques, which again add just a little bit of spice and variety to the gameplay to keep things fresh. The gameplay can be a little dull at times and fairly unchallenging, especially when you've unlocked a multitude of things, which is why I cranked the difficulty up to hard, and then lethal when that difficulty dropped, which is as it sounds, you die in pretty much one hit, but so do the enemies. And considering you come across enemies pretty much in always groups of 5+, you're really taxed in what you're doing there, because all it takes is one mistake and you have to restart the entire encounter. But as I said, Sucker Punch have pulled out some sort of black magic, because the load times for this game are almost virtually non-existent, which is absolutely insane given the graphical fidelity of this game. I also think that a lock-on button would have done the game some real good. Jin attacks in the direction that you point your left analog stick, but there can be some inaccuracies at times, and it is hard to track enemies and get him to attack specific ones, especially if they are clustered together. I'd also like to see perhaps some different enemy variety. I mean, obviously you've got 4 different kinds of enemies. I think it would be great if they added more. Perhaps even more stances will be cool, or provide some different uses for these specific stances other than just breaking stagger meter of specific enemies faster. But I do have to give credit where it is due. The gameplay is definitely serviceable. You can play it however you want to play it. If you want to fish for parries the entire time, be my guest. There is just frame timing for parries, especially on lethal. I think the window is only a few frames. Don't quote me on that, but it is extremely tight, and again, if you mess it up, you're essentially dead. So, all in all, gameplay is serviceable, but I do think they can improve it in future. If there is a sequel, which hopefully this game does get a sequel, I think they did a lot of things right. They've refined the open world experience, so to speak, as many people have put it. A lot of people seem to compare Ghost of Tsushima to Assassin's Creed games. I myself can't necessarily comment on that. I think the last time I played an Assassin's Creed was Black Flag, which I think is 2013, 2014, so 6 or 7 years ago. No idea how the modern Assassin's Creeds play, so if it does play like them, I can't say for sure. And before I do forget, in terms of the sound design, I think they knocked it out of the park for things like the OST, the Japanese or English dub, sound effects. Not really much I can say there for it all, other than they did it really, really well, and I think it suited the game, and especially highlighted a lot of different moments in cutscenes, especially when you hear melodies just kind of phase into existence. But that is essentially going to be it for this video, as I waffle on, I think, for almost 20 minutes, which I think for me is one of the longest videos I've done. Let me know down in the comments below what you think about Ghost of Tsushima. Did you enjoy it? Have you played it? If you've seen any gameplay of it, do you think it looks interesting? Let me know down in the comments below. With all that said and done, it has been me, DevilNeverCry. I would like to thank all of you for watching, and as always, I'll see you all next time.